The auction yard smelled of dust, sweat, and faint traces of hay, its wooden fences weathered by years of noise and neglect. A restless crowd gathered under the pale afternoon sun, boots crunching against the dry ground as murmurs traveled from one person to another. All attention snapped toward the gate when a heavy chain rattled, and the air shifted with a sudden tension. Out from the shadows came a horse unlike the others presented that day. His coat, once a proud sheen of black, was now dulled with dust and scars. His muscles rippled with violent energy, his eyes a storm of fury and mistrust. He reared against the ropes, hooves slamming down with enough force to rattle the planks of the arena, and the crowd collectively stepped back. Children clutched their mothers, men shook their heads, and whispers rippled like wind through wheat. This was no ordinary animal. This was a beast that had broken every hand that tried to tame him. The auctioneer's voice rang out, louder than the murmurs, though lined with mockery. Here he is, folks. Untamable, they call him. Dangerous, unfit, a wild devil in the skin of a horse. Who dares take him home? Laughter answered, though it carried unease, for everyone had seen how he lunged at the handler just moments before. The horse's ears flattened, his teeth flashing as he bit at the air, a sound that cut sharper than the auctioneer's hammer. The threat of his fate lingered heavy in the air. If no one stepped forward, everyone knew where he would end up. Sold for slaughter, forgotten, dismissed as nothing but wasted muscle and bone. Among the crowd, half hidden behind the taller figures of men and women, stood a girl. She looked far too young to be there, her frame slight, her clothes plain and worn at the seams. A stray lock of hair, sun-bleached at the edges, fell across her cheek as she kept her gaze locked on the furious animal. Unlike the others, she did not shrink back when he reared. Her lips were pressed together, her hands clenched against her side, yet there was no fear in her eyes, only something quieter, deeper. Recognition. It was as though she saw not a monster, but a mirror. While the crowd muttered that the horse was cursed, she watched him with a strange patience, as though she understood the language of his thrashing hooves and desperate eyes. The auctioneer rattled off starting bids, his tone derisive, each call greeted with silence. Come now. Surely one of you brave men can handle him. He'll be useful in the right hands, if you've got the courage. Still, no hands rose. Instead, more laughter, more shaking heads. The horse screamed in protest, slamming against the rope, and the crowd flinched backward once again. The girl's fingers trembled at her side before slowly rising into the air. The movement was so small at first it nearly went unnoticed, but when the auctioneer caught sight of it, he blinked, almost uncertain. Well now, he drawled, leaning over the edge of the stand. What's this? The little lady thinks she's got what it takes. A wave of disbelief rolled through the people gathered. Voices rose. She's a child. She'll get herself killed. Foolishness. But she did not lower her hand. Her eyes never left the horse, her jaw tightening with quiet defiance. The auctioneer smirked, shaking his head. You must be joking. This beast will tear you apart before you even get a saddle on him. Still, she remained unmoved. Another bid followed, though weaker, uncertain. Yet when the auctioneer pressed again, the girl lifted her chin and gave a number so final it silenced the murmurs. The hammer came down with a decisive crack, and a hush swept over the arena. Against all odds, against all reason, the untamable horse had been sold to her. The whispers returned at once, sharper now, cutting through the silence like knives. Some sneered that she was naive, some muttered that the horse would kill her before the week was out, and others shook their heads in pity. But none of them mattered to her. As she stepped forward, her heart hammered, yet her expression remained steady, as though she had been preparing for this very moment long before today. She reached the stall, where the handlers struggled to restrain the animal. They warned her with wide eyes, urging her to keep her distance. One hissed under his breath, "Girl, you don't know what you're doing." But she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, each footfall deliberate, every movement careful. The horse jerked against the chain, his nostrils flaring, teeth snapping just inches from her shoulder. The handlers cursed, trying to drag him back, but she lifted a hand, small, steady, trembling only slightly, and whispered words only he could hear. Her voice was calm, quiet, the kind of sound that contrasted against the chaos of his violence. He struck the ground with his hooves, the thunder of it reverberating through the stable walls, and for a moment it seemed he would crush her beneath his rage. Yet she did not flinch. Her eyes stayed on his, unwavering, searching. In that instant, the horse faltered, just for a heartbeat. His ears twitched, his breath caught, as though surprised by her stillness. Then the storm returned, hooves pounding, rope straining, the handlers shouting. The crowd gasped as the girl stood her ground, not fleeing, not even stepping back. Dust swirled around her feet, the smell of sweat and fear thick in the air, and still she whispered. The horse's front hooves slammed into the earth, so close she could feel the tremor beneath her skin. She staggered slightly, but did not retreat. Something passed between them in that suspended moment, not trust, not yet, but the faintest recognition that she was not like the others who had come before. The tension stretched until it seemed it would break, the crowd holding its breath, waiting for the scream of pain they were certain would follow. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the ragged sound of the horse's breathing and the girl's quiet words. He lowered his head for the briefest second, muscles taut, eyes wild, but no longer blind with rage. The handlers exchanged nervous glances, uncertain whether they had just witnessed the start of a miracle or the calm before a storm that would consume them all. The girl reached out, her fingertips hovering in the space between them, and though she did not yet touch him, the distance had closed enough to make the impossible seem almost within reach. The moment shattered as the horse reared once more, hooves flashing dangerously close. But this time the girl did not stumble back. Her lips moved again, whispering with steady determination. The scene froze there, balanced on the edge of disaster and hope, leaving every onlooker unsure of what would come next. The girl's defiance, the horse's fury, the tension that bound them together, it all hung heavy in the air, demanding resolution. Whatever happened after this moment would change them both forever. Morning light spilled across the farmyard, gilding the edges of broken fences and scattered tools. The girl stood at the threshold of the stable, her heart drumming with anticipation and unease. Inside, the horse shifted restlessly, his massive body tense, his hooves striking against the packed dirt floor in irregular rhythms. He was a storm barely contained within four wooden walls. The handlers had long since left, shaking their heads, certain she would fail before the week ended. Now it was only the two of them, bound together by choice and circumstance. She inhaled deeply, clutching the small bag of feed she had carried in both trembling hands, as though it might bridge the canyon of mistrust between them. Her first attempt was met with scorn. She eased forward, setting the feed just inside the stall, careful not to press closer than necessary. The horse flung his head back with a violent snort, his eyes burning with suspicion. He struck the ground, scattering dust into the air, and turned his flank to her, a gesture of dismissal. The rejection cut deeper than she expected. Her arms fell to her sides, and for a fleeting moment, she thought of retreat. Yet something inside her refused to yield. Quietly, she settled onto the wooden bench opposite the stall door. She sat there for hours, her knees tucked close, her hands folded. She made no sudden movement, no demand. She simply existed in his presence, her breathing measured, her gaze soft but steady. The horse circled, paced, and lashed his tail, but gradually, the storm of his resistance dulled into wary stillness. The days repeated in much the same way. Each morning she entered, placing feed closer, testing the fragile boundary between them. Each evening she left with bruises of failure, yet always with the conviction to return. The farm workers mocked quietly as they passed, muttering that she wasted her time. A neighbor, leaning against the fence one afternoon, called out with rough laughter, "That beast will never bow to you, girl. Better to cut your losses before he kills you." She did not answer. The words slid past her like dull knives, because her resolve was not built on the opinions of others. It was forged in something older, something heavier. One evening, as she lingered by the stall, memories crept in unbidden. She remembered a house once filled with warmth that had grown cold after her mother's passing. She recalled nights when silence weighed heavier than words, when her father sat withdrawn, unreachable in his grief. She had felt invisible, unwanted, much like the creature before her now. Pain had carved her small world hollow, but it had also taught her what it meant to fight to be seen, to be heard, to matter. In the horse's furious defiance, she saw her own reflection, the same bruised spirit, the same need for someone to refuse to give up. The first breakthrough came not with triumph, but with the smallest surrender. She entered one late afternoon, sunlight spilling in golden shafts through the slats of the stable walls, carrying nothing but an apple she had saved from her own meal. The horse watched her warily, ears flicking back and forth, muscles twitching. She lowered herself to the ground, legs folded beneath her, holding the apple on her open palm. Time dragged on, silence stretching taut. At last, with hesitant steps, the horse edged closer. His nostrils flared, breath hot against her skin, and in a swift motion, he plucked the apple from her hand. Juice dripped across her fingers as he crunched, his eyes never leaving hers. For the first time, she smiled, not a broad, careless grin, but a fragile curve of relief. It was not victory, but it was hope. Yet progress was never steady. The following morning, emboldened by the night before, she reached out her hand too quickly. The horse lashed out, a hoof striking the gate with such force that the sound echoed through the stable like thunder. She stumbled back, the shock rattling through her bones. Her arm scraped raw against the wooden post. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, not only from pain, but from the sting of rejection renewed. Outside, her aunt, who had come to deliver water, gasped and cried out for her to stop this madness. "He'll crush you one day," the woman said, her voice trembling. "You can't save what doesn't want to be saved." The girl wrapped her arms around herself, swallowing her sobs, and whispered under her breath, "He deserves a chance. Just one chance." Her aunt shook her head and walked away, but the girl stayed, planting herself once again before the stall. The horse had not meant to injure her, she told herself. His fear was not malice, but survival. She nursed her bruises quietly, refusing to let them be scars of defeat. Days blurred into a rhythm of patience. She learned to move slower, to wait longer, to measure her breath with his. She noticed the small shifts, a tail that no longer whipped so furiously when she entered, ears that tilted rather than flattened when she spoke, eyes that softened in fleeting, almost imperceptible ways. She did not claim these as victories aloud, but inside her heart, she collected them as proof that healing was possible. One night, exhaustion overtook her, and she leaned against the stall, eyes fluttering shut. When she awoke with a start, the horse was standing closer than he ever had before, his head lowered, his breath steady. For a moment, the world held its breath. She did not move, did not speak, only met his gaze. It was as though he was testing her silence, measuring whether she was truly different from the countless hands that had pulled, prodded, and punished him before. Slowly, he turned away, settling into the corner of the stall, but the closeness lingered like a fragile truce. It was enough to strengthen her resolve further. The whispers around town grew harsher as time stretched. Neighbors claimed she was wasting precious feed, that her obsession with the animal was foolish. They predicted disaster, whispering of broken bones and wasted effort. Yet none of their words pierced the cocoon she built around herself and the horse. Her world had narrowed to this single struggle, this fragile thread of connection she refused to let snap. Each night, she whispered the same words before she left the stable, words spoken not with command but with promise. "I won't give up on you. Not ever." The horse did not yet trust her. His hooves still struck in warning, his head still tossed in suspicion, but he no longer turned his back completely. His eyes followed her movements with wary calculation rather than blind fury. For the girl, that was enough. It was proof that change could be coaxed, not forced. Proof that time and patience, when offered freely, could carve cracks into the walls built by fear. The section closed not with triumph, but with a choice. After a long day, when the bruises on her arm ached and the voices of doubt grew louder, she stood in the stable doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. She could have walked away then, admitted defeat, and spared herself the pain of further struggle. Instead, she stepped forward, her hand resting on the rough wooden door. "Tomorrow," she whispered to him, her voice steady. "Tomorrow we'll try again." The horse snorted softly, his body shifting but not recoiling, and for the first time, she felt the faintest whisper of something new between them. Not trust, not yet, but the fragile beginning of understanding. Dawn broke over the horizon with streaks of orange and gold, painting the world in warmth. Yet the girl's breath misted in the cool morning air as she approached the stable. Each day had become a ritual, but this morning carried a different weight. She sensed a shift, subtle yet undeniable, as though the long hours of patience and persistence had carved a fragile bridge between her and the horse. His eyes still burned with caution, yet there was less fury, more watchfulness. When she entered, he did not rear or strike. He stood, chest heaving, nostrils flaring, but he stayed rooted in place, as though testing whether he could remain still in her presence. It was not acceptance, not fully, but it was progress. She began walking the perimeter of the paddock with him, not holding reins, not demanding control, simply moving beside him. At first, he resisted, pacing with jerky steps, head tossing in irritation. She mirrored his movements patiently, every step deliberate, her gaze lowered so as not to challenge him. Eventually, he slowed, his stride aligning with hers in uneven rhythm until, for fleeting moments, they moved as one. To anyone else it might have looked meaningless, yet for her, it was monumental. Each synchronized step was proof that he was beginning to see her not as an enemy, but as a companion. Still, doubt gnawed at her edges. She knew how fragile this balance was. One wrong motion could unravel everything. That thought became heavier when an old trainer appeared one afternoon, leaning against the weathered fence. His clothes carried the scent of leather and dust, his eyes sharp with the wisdom of years. He had seen countless horses pass through the auction, countless girls and boys attempt the impossible. He watched in silence for a long while, his expression unreadable, before speaking. "You're not breaking him," he said, voice low gravelly. "You're healing him. But healing can be more dangerous than force. It requires more of you than strength. It requires your heart." The girl met his gaze, uncertain whether he was warning her to stop or encouraging her to continue. The man folded his arms, nodding toward the restless animal. "He's fire. Fire can warm or it can burn. Handle it wrong, and it will destroy you." She swallowed hard but lifted her chin, answering softly, "Then I'll learn to walk through the fire." For the first time, the old man's stern face softened. He did not smile, not fully, but his silence carried a trace of respect. Encouraged by the fragile progress, she attempted something greater. She brought a saddle into the stable, resting it on the fence in plain sight. The horse tensed instantly, ears flicking back, muscles tightening. She did not move toward him. Instead, she let the saddle remain where it was, a silent promise of what lay ahead. Each day, she brought it closer, never rushing, never demanding. At first, he snorted and turned away, but slowly, his resistance dulled to wary tolerance. One evening, under fading light, she brushed her hand along his back and placed the saddle gently across him. He stiffened, body rigid as stone, but he did not explode into violence. Her hands trembled as she fastened the girth strap, her breath shallow with anticipation, ready to spring back if he bolted. But though he quivered with unease, he allowed it. That night she lay awake replaying the moment, her chest swelling with the knowledge that trust, fragile and incomplete, was beginning to take root. The first ride was chaos. She climbed onto his back with the cautious slowness of someone stepping onto a battlefield. The instant her weight settled, he bucked, wild and violent, sending dust billowing into the air. She clung with every ounce of strength, her body slamming against the saddle, her arms burning as she fought to hold on. He twisted, lunged, tried to throw her, but she did not scream, did not strike. "Instead," she whispered, her voice strained but steady, speaking the same promise she had offered since the beginning. "I won't give up on you." The words cut through the chaos, not to silence him completely, but to soften the edges of his fury. After what felt like an eternity, he stopped, sides heaving, sweat darkening his coat. His chest rose and fell with sharp, heavy breaths, and slowly, she reached forward to stroke his mane. Tears blurred her vision, but she let them fall freely, pressing her forehead against him. It was not victory, it was a truce. Word of her progress spread quickly. Some called her reckless. Others claimed she had bewitched the beast. A few, more generous, began to wonder aloud if perhaps she had discovered something no one else had. The girl ignored them all, keeping her focus on the horse. She cared little for their praise or ridicule. Her only concern was the bond forming between them, delicate yet undeniable. But the murmurs grew louder when news reached the town of a local showcase, an event where riders displayed their horses, a place where skill was tested and reputations forged. The suggestion that she might bring him there sparked laughter and disbelief. That wild thing in front of a crowd, they jeered. He'll kill her before she makes it across the field. Her father, weary and worried, confronted her one evening. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice heavy with fear more than anger. "I can't watch you destroy yourself for an animal that will never love you back." She met his words with silence at first, torn between the ache of his concern and the fire of her resolve. Finally, she whispered, "He already loves me. He just doesn't know how to show it yet." Her father turned away, his jaw tight, unable to understand but unwilling to fight her further. The decision weighed heavily, yet the girl knew what she must do. If she could prove their bond before others, it would not only silence doubt, but free the horse from the shadow of his cursed reputation. She wanted the world to see what she saw, not a monster, but a spirit worthy of trust and redemption. So she began to prepare. Each day, she guided him across wider spaces, teaching him to respond not to force, but to the soft cues of her voice and the steady rhythm of her touch. Setbacks still came, sudden bucks, startled leaps, moments when fear resurfaced like a storm threatening to undo everything. But with each stumble, she returned, patient and unwavering. There were nights when exhaustion left her curled against the stable wall, tears streaking her face, whispering questions into the darkness. Was she foolish to keep trying? Could love and patience truly mend wounds carved so deeply? Yet every morning, when the first light slipped through the cracks, she rose again, determined to try once more. As the showcase approached, anticipation mingled with dread. The townsfolk waited with hungry curiosity, eager to witness either miracle or disaster. The old trainer visited once more, studying the pair as they practiced. He said little, but before leaving, he offered a final piece of advice. When the moment comes, don't try to control him. Trust him. That's the only way he'll trust you back. The girl held onto those words as though they were a lifeline. She knew the challenge ahead would be more than a test of skill. It would be the crucible where fear, patience, and love collided, demanding every ounce of her courage. And though uncertainty gnawed at her, she made her choice. She would take him to the showcase, no matter the risk, because for the first time, she believed not just in herself, but in the broken spirit who had become her reflection. The night before the event, she stood beside him in the quiet stable. He pressed closer than ever before, his breath warm against her arm, his eyes calmer, though still shadowed by history. She rested her hand on his neck and whispered, "Tomorrow, they'll see you the way I do." He flicked his ears, shifting but not retreating, and in that small gesture, she found all the courage she needed. Tomorrow loomed uncertain, but tonight, in the fragile stillness, she felt the undeniable truth. They were no longer girl and beast, but something greater, something bound by a trust no one else believed possible. The morning of the showcase dawned crisp and clear. The sky stretched wide and endless above the rolling fields. Villagers poured into the arena, voices buzzing with anticipation, eager for spectacle and scandal. They crowded along the fences, their laughter sharp, their words laced with doubt. Children perched on shoulders to see better, and older men leaned on canes, shaking their heads knowingly. All eyes turned when the girl appeared at the gate, leading the horse that had been branded Untamable. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, sweat already glistening on his muscles, his ears flicking in restless agitation. The whispers rose at once, disbelief carried in every breath. She'll never manage him. This will end badly. Poor foolish girl. Yet she walked on, her steps steady, her face calm, even as her heart thundered beneath her ribs. The horse balked at the noise of the crowd, jerking back, eyes wild. His body trembled, and for a moment it seemed he might tear free and bolt. A ripple of laughter broke from the stands. The girl reached up, resting her hand lightly against his neck, her lips moving in a soft whisper. The words were not for the crowd, but for him alone. The same promise she had repeated night after night. His breathing slowed by a fraction, his head lowering just enough for her to guide him forward into the open space. Gasps scattered through the audience as the pair moved toward the center of the arena, fragile but unbroken. The showcase began with a simple course, wooden posts marking the path. Other riders had entered before her, their horses prancing with controlled elegance, responding to firm tugs and commands. In contrast, she gave no harsh pull, no shouted order. Instead, she leaned gently, guiding him with subtle cues. At first, he resisted, sidestepping, tossing his head, his hooves striking the dirt in defiance. A murmur rippled through the spectators, confirmation, they thought, of their predictions. But the girl did not fight him. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled, and exhaled slowly, letting her calm flow into the reins, into the fragile thread between them. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, his movements softened. He began to follow the path, hesitant but willing, his ears twitching back toward her voice. As they rounded the first bend, a sudden noise shattered the rhythm, a child's shriek from the stands. The horse bolted sideways, muscles surging with panic, eyes rolling white. The girl clung tightly, her body swaying with his wild energy, but she did not yank or strike. She whispered again, voice trembling but steady, pouring every ounce of trust she carried into those words. For a breathless moment, disaster loomed. Then, with a shudder, he slowed, sides heaving, and steadied beneath her. The crowd hushed, stunned into silence by the sight of a beast so feared, halting at the sound of a girl's voice. They continued, one obstacle after another, each one testing the bond they had forged. A narrow bridge of planks that rattled under his weight. He hesitated, snorting, but she leaned forward, murmuring encouragement, and he crossed without frenzy. A set of poles arranged for weaving. He stumbled awkwardly, nearly knocking them over, yet he adjusted, guided not by force but by her quiet cues. Sweat darkened his coat, dust rose beneath his hooves, and still they pressed on. With every step, the crowd's skepticism shifted, disbelief giving way to awe. Near the end came the greatest challenge, a low fence to be jumped. To the horse, once broken and battered, it was a wall of memory, a reminder of pain and fear. He balked, hooves skidding in the dirt, nostrils flaring. The girl tightened her grip, but did not urge harshly. She leaned close, her cheek against his mane, whispering not command but assurance. The arena seemed to hold its breath. With a surge of power, he leapt, clearing the fence in a spray of dirt and sunlight. The crowd erupted, voices rising not in mockery but in thunderous applause. The girl landed lightly, tears burning her eyes as she stroked his neck, whispering gratitude. The course was complete. They had done what no one believed possible. She guided him to the center, dismounting with quiet grace, her hand still resting against his shoulder. The horse stood tall beside her, chest heaving, ears pricked not in anger but in alert curiosity. The silence that followed was broken only by the scattered clapping of a few, which swelled into a roar of approval. Even those who had doubted most found themselves on their feet, cheering, their voices carried on the wind. The old trainer, leaning against the fence, allowed the faintest smile to crease his weathered face. Her father, standing in the crowd, wiped a tear from his cheek, pride softening the grief that had long weighed him down. The girl bowed her head, overwhelmed, but she did not revel in the applause. Instead, she turned to the horse, her eyes filled with gratitude and wonder. He had trusted her, just as she had trusted him. Together, they had crossed the line between fear and faith, between rejection and belonging. She pressed her forehead against his, whispering so softly that only he could hear. "We did it. You're free now." He flicked his ears, exhaling with a low, steady breath, as though answering her in kind. The showcase ended, yet the moment lingered in every heart present. People who had once dismissed the horse as a monster now spoke of him with awe. They would tell the story for years, of the girl who tamed not with force but with patience, who healed with love rather than chains. But for her, it was not about glory or recognition. It was about a promise kept, a bond that had saved them both from being lost. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the arena, the girl led him away from the crowd. Behind them, cheers still echoed, but ahead lay only quiet fields and the promise of a life no longer burdened by fear. She knew challenges would remain, setbacks would come, but she no longer doubted their path. Together, they had faced the fire and emerged stronger, unbroken. That night, under the blanket of stars, she sat by his side in the open pasture, watching him graze peacefully. No chains bound him, no walls confined him. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze with calm eyes that once blazed only with rage. She smiled, brushing his mane gently. "You were never untamable," she whispered. "You just needed someone to believe." Her words floated into the night, carried by the wind, a truth she would never forget. And so the story closed, not with a triumph shouted from rooftops, but with the quiet strength of trust earned, of love returned, of resilience proven. The girl and the horse, once broken in their own ways, now stood whole together, bound not by ownership, but by faith. Their journey had ended in this chapter, yet in truth, it had only just begun. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.